Chapter 4, Folk and Popular Culture, including
Tiffany,
Justine,
Joshua, and me, Jake.
Popular culture, key issue 1. Where are folk and popular leisure activities distributed? Many people don't know the difference between folk and popular culture. Heck, most people don't even know what those two are. Don't worry, I'm here to help. Folk culture is practiced by small, homogeneous groups living in isolated rural areas, while popular culture is found on large, heterogeneous societies that share certain habits despite their differences. Some of the daily necessities that every person must have is food, clothing, and shelter, unless you don't wear clothes. In addition, some leisure activities include art and recreation. You may have a habit, a repetitive act that an individual performs, like praying at a certain time during the day, or a custom, a repetitive act of a group that relates to everyone's characteristics, like playing sports after school with your best friend. All types of culture originates at a hearth, the center of an innovation. Folk culture usually has an anonymous hearth, while popular culture is often a product of a developed country like North America or Europe. An example of popular music in the 1900s are records and sheet music. Now we have phones and computers that have all our music, like portable speakers, earbuds that can play our music. Folk songs may tell a story or convey information about real-life events like birth, death, and marriage. On the other hand, popular music today is totally different. We have songs that are written to be sold or performed to an audience. Soccer was originally a folk sport, and it was invented in the 11th century when some workers found the head of a Danish man and started to kick it around. Then it was called Kick the Dane's Head, until they began to use an inflated cow bladder when it was called football.
soccer way. Mano.
Oops. Football had finally become a popular sport in the 1800s when the association was shortened to ASSOC, A-S-S-O-C. From there, it got the word mixed up with soccer until they finally changed it. Think about how soccer was invented, and now it's an Olympic sport played by over 200 countries. With that, getting the sport into the Olympics is very difficult. The sport must be widely practiced in at least 75 countries, 50 for girls. Some of them include basketball, soccer, gymnastics, cycling, wrestling, aquatics, water polo, swim and dive. Anyway, some of the surviving folk sports are cricket, wushu, a form of martial arts, and baseball, believe it or not.
Oof.
Baseball was invented in North America and diffused to Japan after it was introduced by American soldiers who were fighting during World War II. There you go, that was key issue 1, where are folk and popular leisure activities distributed?
Key issue 2, where are folk and popular material culture distributed? Material culture includes food, clothing, and shelter. Material elements of folk culture may have an unknown origin or multiple origins from groups living in isolation that may have diffused slowly through relocation diffusion. Popular culture's materials may vary more in time than place, and they usually have a clear origin, either coming from a particular person or place, and diffuse rapidly. And in clothing with folk preferences, people may wear a distinctive piece in response to environmental or cultural reasons. For example, in the Netherlands, where the Dutch wear wooden shoes, not only for show but to also keep their feet dry in the wet climate. Increased travel and the diffusion of media may expose cultures to other forms of dress, as the poncho from South America has been adopted worldwide. Wearing traditional clothing in countries dominated by pop culture may be controversial, and it also works the other way around. Like in North Africa and Southwest Asia, where casual Western influenced clothing is discouraged in women, while in men it's encouraged. Popular culture's styles usually reflect a person's occupation. For example, lawyers and executives usually wear dark suits, but they also may reflect a person's wealth, since what's in one season may not be in fashion in the next, and the clothes are typically expensive. Improved communications have also permitted diffusion of clothing, as in the clothes might be designed in New York City and then produced in Malaysia for a cheaper price. Food preferences of folk culture are affected by the availability of product and cultural traditions established by social, religious, and ethnic membership. Food is largely influenced by the environment, as in people adapt to their food preferences to conditions in the environment, like in Asia where rice is grown in milder and moister regions, and in Europe where an abundant wood supply encouraged the slow stewing and roasting of foods. There are food taboos in culture, where people refuse to eat a certain type of plant or animal. They may establish a food taboo in concern of the natural environment, like Muslims don't eat pork because they're seen as dirty. With pop culture, there's a difference in Coke and Pepsi preferences throughout the world. Like in North America, Coke is preferred, but in Quebec, it's Pepsi because they advertise Pepsi to elements of uniquely French-Canadian culture. And also in the Soviet Union, where before Pepsi was preferred, but with the breakup of the Soviet Union, Coke was then the popular choice because Pepsi was associated with the communist Soviet Union. But with US popular culture, we may choose particular foods and beverages in preference for what is produced, grown, or imported locally. Like in California, wine is consumed regularly because production is concentrated there. Cultural backgrounds also affect what people eat or drink, like in Nevada, where the consumption rate of alcohol is high because of gambling and resort activities that take place. Like the distinctive character of a wine is derived from a vineyard's terroir, a unique combination of the soil, climate, and other physical characteristics of the soil and other physical characteristics where the grapes are grown. Culture-wise, wine is a social custom of Italy and France that dates back to the Roman Empire, while it's discouraged in the Middle East and Southern Asia because of religion. There are environmental influences on folk housing. The materials used to construct these buildings are influenced partly by the resources available in the environment, but the designs of the house are due to local culture preference. There may also be sacred spaces in homes. They're usually derived from religious values and environmental factors, as in sacred walls or corners, like in Madagascar, where the main door is in the west and the northern wall is for worshipping ancestors. Housing built in the 1940s demonstrates how popular culture vary more in time than in place. With US folk housing, they use the wood that they got from clearing fields and use them for their homes, barns, and fences. Their homes reflected whatever upscale style was prevailing from where they migrated. Folk housing can be seen in the US with older homes. In US popular housing, rapid communication and transportation systems provided people with a knowledge of alternative styles, and now homes aren't usually built by their owners, but instead a company.
Q 3. Why is access to popular and folk culture unequal? Popular culture is usually diffused around the world through electronic media. Problem with electronic media is that there's a lack of access, but this problem is mainly in LDCs or lesser developed countries. TV has been the most important electronic media format both in the 20th and 21st century. On an average, a human watches 30.1 hours. But other forms of electronic media are telegraph and radio, but that was mainly in the 20th century. Television diffused during the 20th century from the United States to Europe. But during the mid-20th century, US had 86% of the world's 37 million TV sets. The diffusion of the internet in the late 20th century, there was a rapid increase in internet users from 40 million to 361 million. But the percentage of internet users declined, but it increased in the 21st century for the US. In the early 21st century, popular culture had diffused through social media. The different types of social media is Facebook, which was founded in 2004 and started to diffuse rapidly, mainly in the US. There is also Twitter, which the US holds the most Twitter messages. And then the last one would be YouTube, which the US has 30% of the worldwide users.
Josh, stop watching YouTube!
But Mom, I'm contributing to the 30% of TV users worldwide.
Teenagers these days.
Okay, People in developing countries who do embrace folk culture are challenged by the increased availability of electronic media. Folk culture is threatened externally, which is the contact of electronic media, and it can be internal, which is forms of social media. The three countries that dominate television industry is Japan, United Kingdom, and the United States, who are also major exporters of programs. These countries use TVs to spread cultural imperialism, such as freedom for women and glorification of youth. These countries also use TV to spread news, but the problems as to in developing countries, the government controls news, which could lead to a more biased opinion. The diffusion of this information mainly comes from the Associated Press and Reuters. And the world's 25 largest media companies are in developed countries. But many African and Asian government officials criticize the Western concept of freedom of the press. Internal threat, as George Orwell's novel anticipated, that the control of people's daily lives, such as controlling what people watch by blocking foreign content. Changing technology has made TV a force of political change rather than stability. Government tries limiting content, but the countries try to limit these four types of content. Political, which includes minority rights or religious movements. Social content, which relates to sexuality, gambling, or illegal drugs. Security content, like border disputes or separatist movements, and internet tools such as email. As the government is trying to control social media, it is really hard for them to control and it is breaking the monopoly of the government control.
Some elements of folk and pop culture sometimes have a hard time being recognized and eventually become irrelevant due to people doing less of it. One example can be found with the Amish, with their practice is not using electronics or technology, which kind of contradicts our culture, which is fully immersed in technology, in which we use our phones all the time with social media, the news, the internet, TV, entertainment. So the Amish cover or disband all of those concepts or ideas. Sometimes it can be hard for folk and pop cultures to be recognized or diffused throughout landscapes because either the terrain or it is too hard to get to a location or just spread it, so eventually they just give up. Sometimes a geographical feature can determine what kind of culture it is and how it is shaped. For example, folk and pop cultures can affect the soil or the air or even cause pollution due to the type of cultural things they do. And most importantly, bigger pop cultures produce higher levels of waste, which can affect the environment and end up being a detriment and not suitable to hold that culture. So it is important a culture can have a sustainable environment to live in and will be able to live there, or eventually will be obsolete among others and be forgotten. Now, since different pop cultures have different foods and what they eat, not all pop cultures or pop cultures are the same, so they have different necessities like foods, clothing, fashions, so they're going to need different materials, and most pop cultures have a big consumption rate in materials, produce, or foods. So since popular cultures produce more recycling, they can use that or reuse it or repurpose it for something else, which basically restarts the whole cycle. But sometimes it leads to piles and piles of trash, which cannot be healthy for the environment and mess up everything. So a big part of pop cultures and folk pop cultures is having a suitable environment in order for them to live in, being able to diffuse and have a safe landscape to walk across, or else they won't be able to reach out. And another is make sure they survive themselves by having high materials or high consumption rates of foods in order for them to be sustainable to live in or keep participating in with their custom.